are so pleased to have Dr. Susan Daniels here with us today. She is the Educational Director and co-founder of Summit Center. Susan is also a professor and of educational psychology and counseling at Cal State University, San Bernardino. She's an internationally recognized expert in the field of gifted education and in creativity. She is co-editor and co-author of Living with Intensity, the book that came out in 2008. More recently, she co-authored Raising Creative Kids with Dr. Dan Peters. That came out a couple of years ago. And along with Dr. Peters, Susan is also co-founder of Camp Summit, which is our annual summer camp for gifted youth up here in the Bay Area. So I'm going to turn it over to Susan Daniels. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hello and welcome. I'm glad to be here this afternoon to talk about one of my favorite subjects, the intensity of gifted individuals. So as Elizabeth mentioned, this talk is titled and based on the book Living with Intensity. And whoops. Elizabeth, my slides are not moving. Nope, here we go, wait a minute. Yay, there we go. So I want to start out with just some basic conceptualizations so that we're all kind of starting on the same page, so to speak. I said, that the title is Understanding the Complex Nature of the Gifted Child. It's very difficult to define a gifted child, right? Because there are so many different ways to be gifted, and there are so many other factors that interact with giftedness that determine development. So I like to start with this slide because I think we can all agree that gifted children are characterized by complexity and unique developmental trajectories. They don't do things at the same time or rate that developmental norms would suggest. And then my favorite definition of giftedness, because it is encompassing, is the Columbus Group definition. Giftedness is asynchronous development in which advanced cognitive abilities, and there it is, and heightened intensity combine to create inner experiences and awareness that are qualitatively different from the norm. This asynchrony increases with higher intellectual capacity. We're talking about the highly gifted, the profoundly and exceptionally gifted. The uniqueness of the gifted renders them vulnerable and requires modifications in parenting, teaching, and counseling in order for them to develop optimally. And that's a key concept because, again, we can't go by norms, general norms. We need to go by the norm of the child, which will fluctuate. Okay, so again, just a few concepts. I'm a former English teacher, so I love words. Intensity, what are we talking about? We're talking about great energy, strength, concentration, vehemence, I love that word, etc., as of activity, thought, or feeling. Actually, activity, thought, and feeling. Use it in a sentence. She works at her art with great intensity. The flip side of intensity is sensitivity. And my co-editor, co-author of Living with Intensity, Michael Behefsky, has 2 PhDs, not one, but 2. One wasn't enough. His first was in microbiology, and then he studied psychology, as I'll talk about later. And so this comes from Michael, talking about sensitivity of organisms. It's the ability of an organism or part of an organism to react to stimuli, and it often brings with that a little bit of a sense of itchiness, irritability, and it's the piece between the stimulus and the response that's experienced internally. And it also refers to heightened capacity as relates to both the subtleties of and the range of experience. The lived experience of the gifted child, adolescent, and adult is different and unique. So it also results oftentimes in excitability, which is the capacity and inclination to be roused to action. And as we'll see as we go through this talk together, all of these qualities have strength attributes associated with them, and some challenges as well. So quite a long time ago, I had a high school student who did this wonderful piece of art and gifted me with it. And unfortunately, it's disappeared along with my travels and moves and the like. But it was similar to this in a way. She gave me a drawing of a hill and a sort of Picasso-esque cubist head at the top with tiny body and feet. And she was rolling down the hill. And she said, sometimes I just feel like a big head rolling around. And as we discussed this and the interpretation of her piece, she said, I just feel like people value me for this. What goes on here? What about the rest of me? And this was at a time where I've been in gifted for a long time. And maybe 20 years ago, it was still pretty maverick to be looking at the social emotional development of the gifted. And that really captured my attention. So this is a little bit more commonplace now. People encounter these concepts, if you do an online search. I just want to honor the fact that we're talking about intellectual capacity and potentially creative capacity, as well as elements of the personality and the lived social emotional experience that includes insightfulness, strong need for stimulation, sense of perfectionism, a need for precision oftentimes, unusual humor. How many of you are raising your hands? Yes, that's my child. Yes, that's me. Sensitivity and empathy, non-conformity, and a tendency to question rules. We'll see this as we talk about our material here. So again, to lay a little bit more of a foundation, the book Living with Intensity is based on the work of Kazimierz Dabrowski, who researched personality and developmental potential. He was a Polish psychologist and psychiatrist, and he worked with artistic, creative, and talented children, adolescents, and adults in his clinic. His theory of development addresses the intensity and sensitivity of gifted individuals throughout the lifespan. He noticed that creative, artistic, and gifted individuals tended to be more sensitive and have more intense reactions than more typically developing individuals. So his concept of development, in contrast to others, does not follow a predetermined path or course. Developmental psychologists such as Piaget and others have a stepwise progression of this will happen 0 to 1, this will happen 1 to 3 years, this will happen 3 to 5 years, and so on. And again, our gifted have an asynchronous path that follows the unique personality development of the individual. So developmental potential is key. What is the potential of the individual and how do we help them actualize it? The developmental potential of an individual pertains to their capacity for talent development, as well as, and perhaps in terms of lifespan development and peace, well-being, and happiness, their larger personality development as individuals throughout the lifespan. 3 main components of developmental potential include overexcitabilities, also known as OEs. When you're giving a talk about overexcitabilities, it's much easier to say OEs 97 times in the space of an hour than overexcitabilities. But the other thing that's nice about the abbreviation OEs is that folks who work with this, other professionals in the field who work with this theory, responded to OE as suggesting also original equipment. These overexcitabilities are qualities that you can see in infants and toddlers. Then the second factor is special talents and abilities. And those are the qualities that we typically think of when we think of gifted children. And importantly, from a social emotional perspective and a developmental potential perspective, Dabrowski talked about the third factor, which is essentially will. And those of us who parent, teach, counsel gifted children, we know it can be very challenging to enlist their engagement if they're not engaged. It was kind of tautological. It went back in on itself, but it's a pretty accurate statement, I think. So Dabrowski explained the sensitivity and intensity experienced by many gifted individuals in terms of these OEs. There are 5 forms of OEs, and overexcitability permeates a gifted person's existence and, very importantly, gives energy to their intelligence, talent, and personality. Overexcitability is the energy, the life force that mobilizes the gifted. So we've got psychomotor OE, sensual OE, intellectual OE, imaginational OE, and emotional OE. And we'll look at each of those. Got a brief overview here, and then we'll look at each of those individually. Psychomotor OE is not physical ability, it's physical energy. It's a surplus of energy. Children who have psychomotor overexcitability are very active, very talkative, restless. Oftentimes I hear from parents that their children don't nap or sleep much. And my own son, when he was an infant, did not nap. And I'd be on the phone with my mother, and my mother would say, "Susan, you've got to make that boy nap." And I said, "Okay, Mom, come on over and show me how," because he just had too much to do, even as an infant. He was very alert, very awake, and very observant. Sensual overexcitability pertains to enhanced refinement and aliveness of sensual experience. So these are the kids that well up with tears when there's a beautiful sunset, or perhaps you had the opportunity with your children to see the red moon last night, which was just an amazing sight. It's truly awesome to see the moon red in the sky. So gifted individuals who have sensual overexcitability are more nuanced in their experience of the senses in the world. And I want to note here that I've been involved in research on overexcitabilities for almost 15 years. And the findings are that gifted individuals tend to have more OEs and at a higher level than more typically developing individuals. But you can be gifted and not have overexcitabilities, and you can be a more typically developing person and have overexcitabilities. So just want to kind of sidebar that before I go on. Intellectual overexcitability relates to questioning, discovery, love of ideas, thirst for knowledge, search for truth. One word that's not on this slide is passion. I think that's a hallmark of gifted individuals, unless they've been dampened for some reason or they're underachieving. Most gifted individuals have a passion or multiple passions. Imaginational overexcitability is one of my favorite because I work in creativity as well. And there's some overlap there. Vividness of imagery, richness of associations, fantasy, dreams, preference for the unusual and the unique. There's a tendency to have imaginary friends, which we'll talk about a little more. Emotional overexcitability relates to great depth and complexity of emotional life, wide range of feelings, a tendency towards compassion with others, and very strong self-examination. I just finished a report, or a piece of a report, in collaboration with one of our psychologists at Summit Center, and I do a differentiated piece: personality, creativity, learning style assessment, and then I write recommendations for education. And this particular child was extremely compassionate, felt others' feelings, cared deeply about others, volunteered at a local, animal shelter, was a very kind young person, but brutal when it came to himself. Brutal in terms of self-examination and a sense of perfection for himself. Okay, so as you might have already sensed, and we'll talk about in more detail, and I already mentioned that the overexcitabilities have positive attributes and assets that are connected with them, and also some challenges. So rather than squelch these intensities, though, what we want to do is introduce avenues for modulation and positive expression of intensity. Rather than squelch the OEs, we want to help children to regulate or adjust them, to alter or adapt according to circumstances. It's okay to be dancing around the house, singing a new song, painting simultaneously while reading 3 books, but you may not be doing that at church or at Aunt Zelda's house on the weekend or what have you. So we want to give children the skills and the self-awareness to help them change or vary their pitch according to circumstance and voluntarily. Our aim is to help the gifted child develop a repertoire of possible response and expression, along with options for self-regulation and personal choice. So, psychomotor overexcitability. Interestingly, psychomotor overexcitability, again from the research perspective, is significantly correlated with high intelligence. It's of all of the overexcitabilities, the highest correlation with intelligence. Psychomotor OE finds expression in myriad ways. Children with heightened psychomotor intensity can appear, very busy and restless. And again, as infants, they generally require less sleep than is normal for most babies. So, one parent that attended a face-to-face session that I gave said, I didn't know if my child was gifted or she was just awake so much longer than everybody else. She experienced more and she knew more. So this brings with it the characteristics of movement, strong drive, and high energy. Some recommendations, and for those of you who have the book, I'm going to put in a little plug for the book. Living with Intensity was co-edited and co-authored by myself and Michael Pahevsky, who translated Dabrowski's work. And I believe we have 14 contributors in the book from across the field of gifted education. Chapter 3, I just highly recommend it if you have a child who exhibits these intensities and seems advanced in terms of developmental potential, both intellectually and emotionally. So with every OE, we seek to discuss the positive aspects. So we seek to discuss the positive aspects of psychomotor overexcitability. You have a lot of energy, you can accomplish a lot, you can play for a long time, etc. And we want to provide for reasonable movement in a variety of settings, involve the child in a physical task, send him or her on an errand, provide for and model activities that soothe and calm. So my son is 34, by the way, but I still tell Devin stories, and Devin went through a period of time where he was particularly intense, and he would come home every day after school and just want to download files, for 2 or 3 hours. Oh, I'm going to tell you about this, and then this happened, and I read this, and then I talked to so-and-so, and I was a teacher, so I was coming home after a full day of talking to kids, and I wanted to give Devin my full attention, but I just couldn't right then. And so I developed an agreement with him that when we got home, I got about 15 minutes to just sort of meditate and be quiet. And, sometimes if we do that, if we take time for ourselves or self-care, we think we're neglecting the child, and we're not at all. We're setting a good example. So sitting quietly and listening to some music, going and having a little lie down on your bed, maybe swimming if you're lucky enough to live in a warm climate, whatever. We're helping our children if we select some of those activities ourselves. And that leads to the next one. Teach that time out can be a choice, not a punishment. I need a time out. I'm an extrovert and I love the work that I do, but when I'm at conferences, I oftentimes, if I'm giving 3 talks in a day, somewhere in there, I need to take 20 or 30 minutes and just go somewhere and sit and, not be actively engaged. And our kids need this too. We know it. We can see it when they're getting overly active or overtired. So teach relaxation techniques. Sensual overexcitability gives children heightened experiences of seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, and hearing. They may have a heightened aesthetic sense and both seek and receive pleasure through their senses, but they may also experience intense irritation and frustration from their sensory overload encounters. It's almost a cliche, but gifted kids typically have real irritation with tags in their clothes or seams in their socks or something just not being quite right in the environment for them. So strategies to encourage modulation of sensual OE. Again, discuss the positive aspects of sensual OE. You notice beautiful sunsets. You notice different colors and shades, and that affects your artwork. You know how to soothe yourself. You know how to quiet yourself. You appreciate softness in the environment. Whatever feedback is positive for this OE in your child. And then, of course, we want to provide environments that limit offensive stimuli and maximize comforting stimuli. We need that to translate to school, too. We need our children to be able to have a soft fuzzy or something that's their go-to object when they're feeling a need for sensual input. And provide opportunities to dwell in delight, allow time to smell the roses or watch the sunset. And as much as possible, foster control of the child's own living space and work setting. I always smile with this parenthetical here. It says, the child's room is his own room, unless mold is growing on the leftover pizza or there are other health hazards. And my microbiologist friend, Michael Behesky, tells me that mold growing on a pizza is not a health hazard. But I don't know if you saw my son's room from the time he was 12 till he was 16. We might debate that. Okay, intellectual overexcitability. Children with intellectual overexcitability have almost insatiable curiosity, as well as a voracious appetite and capacity for intellectual effort and stimulation. Mental activity in these children is usually intensified and accelerated with constant why questions. And I refer to that as the perpetual toddler syndrome. Why syndrome? It's awesome. We want our kids to ask questions, but why? How come? What about? How about? Could we do this? Well, what if we looked at it this way? Could we try? And that's all great. Sometimes intellectual overexcitability can be a challenge because the intellectual passion and pursuit is so intense, and the environment at the time doesn't necessarily have the scope to deal with it, if that makes sense. So, intellectual OE and related needs and recommendations. Discuss the positive aspects of intellectual OE. Honor the need to seek understanding and truth regardless of the child's age. So here's an example. Intellectual overexcitability, I've found, oftentimes interacts with moral sensibility or moral awareness, early moral awareness. We have children who are 3 and 4 who contemplate the meaning of life, who are astounded when they become aware of pets or others dying, what happens after people die. And to have a 3 or 4-year-old pose these questions can be really disarming and overwhelming for adults. But what we need to do is respect the need to know and help children find answers to their own questions, try and find materials that deal with advanced concepts but are appropriate. And I'm going to say for this age level, we're going to say this is an asynchronous child, right? So there are multiple ages in the child and multiple needs that need to be met because of that. Allow children to develop their own projects based upon individual interests. In raising creative kids, Dan and I essentially talk about having a studio at home where kids can draw, paint, design, build, craft, make, etc. That's a great outlet for intellectual overexcitability, creativity, and this intense drive to know and do. Seek opportunities to provide interaction with intellectual peers, not necessarily age peers. And again, when I give this presentation in a face-to-face context, I'll ask the participants, how many of you have friends that are just within 1 year of your birth date? Which sounds like sort of a funny question, and frankly, I think it is a funny question. And yet that's what our schools set up to do. When you're talking about grouping in schools, are we grouping the gifted? Are we cluster grouping in the classroom? Are we ability grouping? Well, Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depends on the district. It depends on the setting. But one thing I know for sure is that we are grouping by age, and it's sort of arbitrary because development in the typical population varies somewhat. And when you put asynchronous development in there, grouping by age doesn't make sense, right? So peers for gifted children. Okay. I'm seeing a question, just a minute. Okay. Peers for gifted children potentially span a wide range. You know, you may have a 7-year-old who plays chess with 30-year-olds and who discusses literature with older siblings and possibly plays really well with the 5-year-old down the street in imaginary games. That's not uncommon, not at all. So that's also, I'm kind of jumping here to the educational applications, but that's also a reason why cluster grouping of the gifted is an important aspect of educational programming beyond differentiating the curriculum. We need to change the curriculum to meet their intellectual needs, but we also need to change who they're working with so they're working with true peers. And some of the time, all that said, that we need to help nurture their intellectual development and respect their intellectual intensity and passions. Some of the time we need to help them get out of their heads and be in their bodies and in the world through nature hikes, molding clay, or touching other substances like finger painting, or I work in mixed media art and I will use my fingers with acrylic paint. It's great fun. It's easy to clean up. Yoga is fabulous. I can't say enough about yoga for children and adults. So just a second, I'm going to have a drink of water here. My overexcitabilities are parching my throat. Okay. I've left this slide in over the years that I've given this presentation because it just cracks me up. Michael Pahevsky said in a book, in something that he wrote, tigers might not have imagination, but imaginary tigers can be made of flames. And I don't know why that cracks me up, but it continues and it endures in just getting a chuckle out of me. So, a novel thought perhaps, yet that's the way of the imagination. In the imagination, anything is possible. We use our imagination every day when we think about planning our day, choosing flowers and a color scheme for a party. And if one has an imagination like J.K. Rowling, an entire feast hall with floating candelabras, wizards, and dragons can result, along with a series of movies. How nice is that? So, imaginational OE needs and recommendations. So the first thing, again, is discuss the positive aspects of imaginational OE. I want to share something with you, though, on that topic, and that's, I said that each OE has positive attributes and challenges. It took me a long time and research and experience with children and talking and reading and writing and thinking before it became clear to me how imaginational OE can be a challenge. And that's that having a strong imagination can dovetail with anxiety and really fuel fears. Literally the bad dragon under the bed, or whatever other creation of mind. So we want to discuss the positive aspects of imaginational overexcitability, and we want to cherish creative and imaginal expression and channel that towards positive expression and opportunities. We also, though, need to be aware that of the potential stressors related to having a considerable imagination, and protect and buffer our children, So we need to encourage them to share their imaginings. I say here, tell stories or draw images of imagined friends, pets, buildings, creatures, and worlds. We also need to give them safe spaces to talk about their fears. And that may be with us, their caretakers, or depending on if they're is a really intense imagination coupled with anxiety, then with any of these overexcitabilities, if they go to the extreme, it may behoove a parent to consider seeing a gifted specialist or a therapist. Okay, so I have another question here. What if imagination is so intense he associates all tasks to this? Should there be limits? Boy, that could be a whole conversation in and of itself. Something that I'll share with you, a personal example, is that my son used to tell stories. I had a colleague come to me. My son was in preschool where I taught in the primary grades, and his teacher came to me and said, "Did you adopt a child? We had a visitor today, and Devin said that he has a new sister." And this was my child's imagination. His imagination was active almost 24/7. And he would say things that were not, I'm going to say accurate. They weren't lies, but to someone who wasn't being sensitive to his imagination, it sure might seem like he's just flat out lying. And I wanted to honor the imagination while also balancing with a reality that we might all consider to be shared, if that makes sense. And so I started saying to Devin, now that's a story, isn't it? You're telling me a story this time, right? Another strategy, another approach that you could take is, I love your imagination. Make time for imaginative play with your child. But sometimes we just need to go to the doctor and have our yearly physical, or we need to brush our teeth, or we need to clean up our room, or whatever. And so, yes, I think there do need to be some limits, and there do need to be some boundaries around any of these overexcitabilities for the well-being of the child. Our children need a lot of accommodation, and they need the walls spread out and the ceiling taken off, and they also need help navigating their own personal realities. So the fact that you're asking me the question, essentially saying is there a point where there's too much imagination? It's telling me that probably you're feeling that there's a point at which there's too much imagination, and so you want to try and build in, like, here's the term, a reality check. So I hope that helps. The person who texted the question, if you'd let me know if that helped a little bit, that'll help me. Thanks. And I'll go on now. So strategies to nurture and encourage modulation of imaginational OE. And again, there's the word modulation. We want to celebrate. Good. Thank you. We want to celebrate the imagination, and we always want to think about modulating for appropriateness and optimal development. Okay, is it appropriate for the environment? Oftentimes the environment, if it's an educational environment, needs to change for the child. But sometimes the child, as a skill of being a human in our world, needs to adapt to the environment. And that's something that we constantly need to navigate with gifted children. So there you have it. The number one point here: help children to distinguish between the imaginary and the quote unquote real world, the world that we all share. There's another question. Give me just a second. What do you recommend regarding Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus, etc.? I still believe in them. No, I'm just kidding. I think children should have the opportunity to believe in those beings as long as they want to. They're getting ready to go to college. Maybe it's time to have a talk. But it's just those are wonderful, whimsical, joyful aspects of childhood, and I don't think we should take that away too early. How does psychomotor OE look different from sensory issues? Can you have both? Sensory processing disorder. How do I know my son with SPD hasn't been misdiagnosed? Okay, this is a very important question, and one that I think I've touched on lightly. And that's that any of these overexcitabilities could look like pathology, right? Psychomotor overexcitability can look like ADHD or manic depressive disorder. Sensual overexcitability can look like sensory processing disorder. Intellectual overexcitability, well, I'm not sure about that one. Imaginational overexcitability, if kids have imaginary friends for too long, people can start to worry and think that they're being a little delusional. And then we're going to get to emotional overexcitability, which is all about the mental life and, how troubling is it for the child, or how well do they manage. So the question is, how do I know my child hasn't been misdiagnosed? There's a fair amount of literature about misdiagnosis of the gifted, and we had a whole day working with professionals, with therapists and clinical psychologists and the like, talking about just these issues. And there's the DSM-4, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is used. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that, for diagnoses. And it's not a psychology and psychiatry are not a perfect science. So if you go to someone who doesn't understand the nuances of a gifted child, of raising a gifted child, and the development of a gifted child, they may be more inclined to see behavior as a diagnosis, where if you come to Summit Center, for instance, we might be more inclined to see behavior as on the range of gifted overexcitabilities. That doesn't mean that we don't diagnose it at Summit Center, but we take an awful lot of data into account before making a diagnosis. And sometimes it's a provisional diagnosis. It may be this. So this is an incomplete answer to your question, I know. Excuse me, I'm thinking. What's just going on here? I'm thinking. But it's a start, and I would urge you to look at the misdiagnosis literature if you haven't already done so, or perhaps think about calling Summit Center. Someone asked, should we talk about this with our sons? I absolutely think you should talk about overexcitabilities with your children. There's a woman by the name of Lisa Rivero who wrote a book about overexcitabilities for teens. There isn't a book for younger children yet, but you certainly can discuss the overexcitabilities with your children. You will know how to put these concepts in a framework or in words that they'll be able to appreciate. Okay. So I'm going to finish this, and then I have another question. Provide outlets for creative pursuits: writing, drawing, acting, dancing, designing, building. Again, I had a report today. This was for a first grader. And this child needs to draw, act, design, and build all the time. This child needs to have opportunities to do this every day. And right now, this child's not getting the opportunities in school. So it's even more important to have those opportunities at home. And it's about the creative, imaginational expression, and it's also about emotional well-being. So there's that. And help your children to use imagination to solve problems and cope with challenges. What might this be like? Let's pretend. What if you did this? Imagine this. Does that make sense? Okay, and I'm hearing we should probably hold questions till the end so that my presentation doesn't get chopped up here. I hope that's okay with you all. Okay, next slide. Emotional overexcitability. Among the 5 OEs that Dorowski identified, the expressions of emotional overexcitability are the most extensive. Intense feelings manifest themselves in extreme, complex, positive, and sometimes negative ways. I'm getting distracted with the text. Oh, somebody's saying that they thought my OE presentation was complete. Not yet, no. Okay, so intense feelings manifest themselves in extreme, complex, positive, and sometimes negative ways. Children with these OEs seem to have extra emotional antennae. I love that phrase. Again, strategies to encourage modulation of emotional OE. Accept feelings in their intensity. Discuss the positive aspects of being an emotional being and how richly we can experience the world, relationships, our pets, etc. that second point there, I think, is really critical. Develop a feeling vocabulary and with it greater awareness of emotions. Include a continuum of feeling words. How many ways can we describe feeling bad, annoyed, irritated, frustrated, aggravated, uneasy, anxious, etc.? Or being happy, content, glad, joyful, blessed, ecstatic, buoyant, and so on. There was an article once, a piece of research, that essentially says that human beings tend to reduce their discussion of emotions to like a box of Crayolas, like 5 or 6, happy, mad, sad, glad, and don't elaborate. With our gifted kids, the more words we're giving them to discuss how they're feeling and describe how they're feeling, the more tools we're providing them with to bring their internal experience out to share with others. So we need to teach children to anticipate physical and emotional experiences and rehearse responses and strategies. We can't expect children to have intense emotions and then just spontaneously on that spot be able to come up with, how do I manage this? We need to coach them and we need to practice with them. We can also model temperature taking. How do I feel right now? Whoops, there's a typo. Oh, no, there isn't. What's my emotional temperature? Am I feeling warm, cool? What might this mean? What are my feelings telling me? Excuse me. And find and choose activities that provide meaningful opportunities for empathy and social concern. I mentioned the young person that I recently worked with who volunteered at a shelter. So volunteer at a pet shelter, participate in a community service project, or find some other humanitarian outreach activity to give deep caring some active expression. Give deep caring some active expression. I hope that's a takeaway for you from this. So, honoring the individual. The overexcitabilities are not a collection of disparate or isolated behaviors. These are the qualities that intertwine within the self of the individual. They determine to a great extent an individual's personality and how she or he both perceives and interacts within the world. If not understood, validated, and afforded opportunities for positive expression, the individual or these aspects may go underground and result in personal difficulties, disconnections, and despair. That's an extreme result. It's not a place we want to go to. So we need to honor the overexcitabilities and the emotional experience of our gifted children. Again, developmental potential equals talents and abilities. Overexcitabilities, and the third factor, will. Forget my parenthetical there about levels of development. We don't need to talk about that right now. But I want to talk about the environment, because physical context and key relationships affect how the overexcitabilities will manifest themselves and if they will tend to be expressed in a primarily positive way or be stifled or frustrated and come out in inappropriate or distressing ways. So I have just a little bit of material that I want to share with you here that is not from Living with Intensity. It's my friend Andy Mahoney's work. He's an extraordinary counselor of the gifted in Chicago. And he developed a model that talked about the environment and talked about the imperative for a supportive environment for the optimal social emotional development of the gifted. So enhance self-understanding and connect to a bigger picture. And what we need to do that is validation, affirmation, affiliation, and affinity. All people need these things: validation, affirmation, affiliation, and affinity. I'm just going to touch on each of these a bit. So validation acknowledges that one's giftedness exists as confirmed by oneself and by others, parents, teachers, institutions, and others in positions of authority. The validation in these relationships facilitates development or growth in some manner. Now, we don't want to fixate on, oh, you're so gifted, darling. Oh, isn't Abigail wonderful? She can read Dostoevsky while she plays the piano with her feet. I'm making things up. Sorry, I don't mean to be disparaging here, but my point is that we want to validate and give feedback about children's strengths, just as we would for any children. Sometimes I know people feel like, oh, I can't address the giftedness, or I'm going to create a situation where my child has a big head, or what have you. And there's a wide range there of giving accurate feedback and validation and being excessive. I hope that makes sense. Affirmation requires interactive acknowledgement, a seconding of the motion of who we are from many supportive individuals or processes. It's the continual reinforcement of self. I don't have to go around with a t-shirt saying, oh, I'm gifted, but inwardly, I need to know I'm gifted and it's okay. I can't tell you how often I'm working with parents, and the apple does not fall far from the tree. And most often when we have a gifted child, we have parents who are gifted, but they don't recognize it because they'll say, well, I wasn't identified. Well, we know that many school districts don't identify gifted children. So just because you didn't have that word attached to you in an educational environment doesn't mean that you're not, right? So I've experienced what one of my colleagues call catching it from your children. Many adults that I work with start having to come to terms with their own giftedness because they need to be there to advocate for their children. So affirmation is, this is okay. This is okay. This is who I am. Affiliation is an alliance or association with others of similar intensities, passions, desires, and abilities. I know that I have one colleague online today joining us because she had not seen this presentation, or we didn't think that she had before. And we attend a number of conferences together at the regional, state, national, and in my case, international level. And, we talk about finding our tribe. A lot of people who are in gifted education and psychology are gifted or twice exceptional. And it's just wonderful getting together with other folks with whom you don't have to censor yourself or translate yourself, if that makes sense. I think it does. It means being received in fellowship or integrated into a group or society without loss of identity or the self. Now, this doesn't mean that we all need to run out and join Mensa or go to a gifted conference, but SANG, Supporting Emotional Needs for the Gifted, has a lovely program for youth, and the kids speak of it very highly. There's PGR, Profoundly Gifted Retreat, and there are chess camps. There's Camp Summit, which is, you don't have to be highly or profoundly gifted, very creative, and needing a hands-on experience. So it's a matter of finding, and then potentially with a multi-potential child, finding a number of different environments that will support affiliation with others of similar interests and abilities, so that we provide a pathway towards connecting the self within community. And affinity maintains the fire of the self. It's an attraction towards that which nourishes and resembles, a mating of soul, spirit, and philosophy. It's a best friend. It's a soulmate. It's a life mate. It's a collaborator. It's not a yearning, but a calling. This has something to do with the soul, a mission, and a sense of purpose in life. There's a deeper and more esoteric meaning involved. Affinity connects the self to the world and the mystery of life. And this is a concept that I feel is strongly interrelated with identity, which comes to the fore in adolescence and young adulthood and on. But we see this also again in younger children, much younger children, depending on what their development is. So I think that may be my last slide. No. Passion and purpose. So here we are then back to the intensity, passion, and drive that underlies intensity and sensitivity as essential qualities for optimizing developmental potential. So again, this is what we're striving to do, those of us who care about gifted children, those of us who are parent gifted children. We want to optimize their developmental potential. We want to pave the way for them to be able to develop positively and with purpose. So that's the reference of our book, and that's a picture of our book. And I'm ready for questions now. I think we have probably close to 10 minutes left for questions. So don't hesitate to start sending them in. All right, here we go. Yeah. Elizabeth says, just type your question here. Any questions? I'm going to go back. Oh, okay. So there was a question about, just a second, I keep losing it, finding it and losing it. Asynchronous development and executive function, and whether this impacts, I think it said overall development. Able to control impulses in earlier years. So, yes, there can be incredible asynchrony between intellectual development, social emotional development, and impulse control. Because in part, impulse control is a physiological response, and it requires some level of physical development. This reminds me of a story of a parent saying to their child, would you please just act your age? And in fact, this is this asynchronous piece again. You've got a 5-year-old who is intellectually gifted, plays chess, plays piano, whatever, and then has a fight with a neighbor over a toy, and cries and has a little bit of a fit. And, you look at the child and say, would you just act your age? The child's acting their age. They're acting one of their ages. And so sometimes, something that we're vulnerable to in working with, especially very intellectually gifted children, is expecting them to be socially the age that they are intellectually. And there's an incongruity there where impulse control has not developed at the rate that intellectual potential has. Okay, so often, how do we prepare gifted kids for adolescence? We have to prepare us for adolescence. I went to a presentation when my son was about 9 by a psychologist in gifted, who said that gifted kids tend to go into adolescence earlier. I'm sorry, many of you may not want to hear this. And I was new in the field and my son was young, and I raised my hand and I said, does that mean that they're finished early? And she said, oh, no. It means they're in adolescence much longer. And the other thing from developmental psychology, not gifted per se, but it pertains to gifted, is that we know that adolescence is lasting longer because of things like college taking longer, young people having to spend more time finding their first job, and et cetera. Young people tend to live at home longer. So we have to be prepared for adolescence. And I think one of the best things that we can do is be candid with our children. Someone said, can we talk to our sons about OEs? We can talk to our children about just about anything. We have to be careful not to over-adultize them, and be thoughtful about what is the appropriate level at which to discuss some of these advanced concepts. So, someone is saying here, so often others suggest ways to fix OEs, but that implies something is broken. How do you explain OEs to others without it seeming like bragging? Well, again, I think if we hold in our mind that overexcitabilities are innate to the person, they're born with them, and they confer certain advantages and challenges, we're not bragging. You know, if we've got a high psychomotor OE kid who doesn't want to sleep at all and is reading under the covers with a flashlight or with an iPad at 2 o'clock in the morning when they have to get up for school at 6:30, you know, this is a parenting dilemma. It's not bragging. So it just really is. Okay. My 4-year-old son always, wait, how do you talk about OEs with teachers without sounding like a problem parent? I would recommend that you make an appointment and you use me as an excuse. I attended a webinar about the social and emotional development of gifted children. And perhaps you want to take my slide which you can do, where I have just the overview of the overexcitabilities and the traits. And you can have a frank discussion with the teacher and say, you know, I know my child is this way. I know my child's intense, and some of it's wonderful, and some of it's really challenging, and it challenges me. And I'm really working to be a good parent, and I know it probably presents some challenges in the classroom. But we really want people to understand that the kids are not setting up to be problems or to be difficult. You know, the kids are struggling with their own inner challenges around their OEs. Okay, my 4-year-old son always plays the role of astronaut, pilot, train machinist, etc., etc. Is it okay to encourage all kinds of roles, changing them all the time? Yes, that's awesome. That's really wonderful. This is called multipotentiality. Or it's an aspect of multipotentiality where a child can do, or an adult, anyone can do many, 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 many things. And so your 4-year-old is doing what we really encourage middle schoolers to do, and that's try on different careers. I thoroughly encourage this sort of play and exploration. It's fine. And certainly an astronaut, pilot, train machinist, those are all wonderful things. How grand is that? And I got a smiley face in response. Very good. Glad you're here from Mexico City. Other questions? Well, I think we're right about at an hour. And once again, this is one of my favorite topics to discuss. I don't mean to be shamelessly promoting our book, but if you haven't gotten it yet, and if you've been interested in being here and you want to know more, there are just so many wonderful people who have contributed to it. And it has sections on childhood, adolescence, and a whole, I think 3 or 4 chapters for gifted adults as well. So thank you for being interested in the work that we do at Summit Center. And I wish you all the very best of luck with your wonderfully gifted children.